One of the main struggles that you'll face when building scripts, especially more complex scripts with lots of nested actions, is scope. Script scope and action scope and variable scope, accessor scope. It's just such a big topic, and there's so many different permutations of how you can use these concepts that it just becomes really complex. The lesson we'll be covering today will go into all of those topics. This is also one of the topics that if you face a struggle in one of your dashboards, one of your scripts related to accessor scope or any kinds of scope, don't struggle too long with it. It's very likely that what your understanding is around accessor scope and all the different scopes isn't necessarily correct. It's better for you to ask someone and have it explained to you why um, the way you're trying to tackle the problem is not the right way. So to start off, I've got a simple dashboard with a data set, a data property set on this container, and we're going to be setting extra widgets because more often than not, when you're dealing with extra widgets, that'll be when script or scope becomes a concern for you. That's because you'll have a lot of nested objects in your scripts. So what I'm going to do first is write a simple map array. I want to build a label for each one of these records using this as the caption, using this as the color, and then also an icon right next to the label. So what we'll need to do is write a map array. There's obviously various ways you can do this. Map array will be fastest. We have a map array. The value we want to map is state self data, and I want to map it to a container with two components inside. Start with container simple. I'll make the direction horizontal, so you will see the icon and label next to each other. And then let's do the icon first and then the label next to it. So the value of the icon we should get from the variable. So that'll be variable.record dot icon, and the caption we'll get from the name. Let's also set the color of the label, or let's do the background color of the container. That'll be variable record color, and let's just make these white so we can see. Sorry, the color white so we can see them properly. Also add some padding to this. And let's add auto child margins to this one. All right, we've built this. Now we need to store this in a variable. And then we can do the set state. All right, so that's everything we need. We can run that. So we can immediately see that none of it really applied properly. The background color isn't set. No, it may be hard to see. The background color is set, but nothing is really working properly there. So that's of course because of the fact that we need scoped accessors. And we need scoped accessors because the values we want to replace, the accessors we want to replace with the correct values, are in nested objects. So I'm going to fix it first, and then we'll go into internally how scopes work so that you can understand it properly. So what we're going to need to do is this map array, when we access the variable, we need to know what the scope of the variable is. I'm going to add an ID to this map array. Let's just call it SM or script map array. And I need to place the SM in front of all of these accessors. One there, and one there. So for all the nested accessors that are inside objects, I need to put that in there. Now we can see it working properly. So to explain why we need to do it this way, we need to go look at how Opus will replace your accessors and when. So I find it best to draw this out. Now, if you have a simple action like this one, and by simple I mean there's no nested objects inside it. Let's just do this, set state. Let's just change the background color of this container to black. So there's no accessors in here. I can go make a variable quickly. Replace this with an accessor. And this will still work, of course. So there we see our black background. So this works because of the fact that we don't have any nested objects. We don't need any scoped accessors like this. So if I were to draw this out, looking at this, what Opus will do before the action runs, so before the set state is performed, is going to look at all the keys and values and look for accessors. If it finds an accessor, it's going to replace it, unless it's inside a nested object. So what that means is anything on this main level, if your nesting is correct, if you've cleaned up your JSON, everything that's on this level will be replaced. So any key that's lined up with this. Similarly, any value that's directly inside, so this one will replace this one will, this one will. As soon as we get into nested objects, let's change this one to a set multi-state. As soon as we get to nested objects, that doesn't work anymore, because Opus will not drill in and replace these accessors for you as well. So refreshing, we'll see the background color is not changing. And that's because we're on a deeper level now. So it would have replaced all of the keys here and their corresponding values. That's fine. All the keys here and their corresponding values. So there's a key, there's a key. But this key's corresponding value is just an object. So the object is not an accessor. If this was instead a string with an accessor inside, variable dot whatever it may be, that's this value, this key's corresponding value, which is an accessor. It does replace that. But because this key, which is on the main level, which is on the main indentation level, because this key is an object, Opus will not drill into this object to replace this variable for you. When you want it to happen, you need to tell Opus to make it happen. So in this case, what we could do is we need an ID for the script, because otherwise we don't know what the scope is of the script. This gives the script an initial scope, in this case being S being the scope. And now we can just put the S in front of this, telling Opus that when this action runs, so when this action runs, it can replace anything. Let's just draw that S over there. It can replace anything where the accessor scope, being S in this case, matches the current scope. And because nothing has changed the scope so far, the scope is still S. So when this script runs, the scope is S. When this script runs, the scope is S. When this script runs, the scope is S until we reach these nested objects. Inside these nested objects, the scope is changed to SM instead. So over here, the scope is still S, so this will also work, s.state.self.data, because when this script runs, Opus will see what's my current scope, it's S, and I can replace this because this is the current scope. Not that I need the scope accessor here because we're not in a nested object. But as soon as we reach this map2 object, the scope changes to SM. That's why we needed SM in there. I could not specify S there because when this script runs the first time and the scope is S, it'll immediately try and replace these. So s.variable record color, it'll immediately try and replace those, and the variable record does not exist in this scope. The variable only exists once we start mapping internally. So inside this scope, we do have the SM variable. There's a few different script actions that do replace the scope, and we'll use a few in this lesson, but they are map array, morph iterate array, for loop, apply comparison can also do it, but that's a more rare case. Those are the main scripts the main actions that'll replace or that can modify the script scope for you. So let's just fix this again, back to SM, and make sure that it all still works. So background color working, and this is working as expected. Another thing to consider is where your variables are defined. So what the scope of your variables are. Each script scope has its own variable scope. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paste this entire script in to Paint. So you can think of your variable scope as a kind of container or a bucket of variables that your current action has access to. And to illustrate that, I'm going to draw a line around the scopes. So the first scope we define is S up there, meaning that all actions will have the scope S. Any action that runs here has the scope S on this level. We also have a new scope that we define over there, which is SM, and anything on this indentation level will have that same variable scope as well in script scope. So on the outside we've got scope S, on the inside we have scope SM. What that means is that when you define variables, when you set variables, those variables are placed into the corresponding, let's call it variable bucket. In this case, we do a set variable over here, and this set variable goes into the S scope. And we can check that by using the reactive tools to go inspect our variables as well. So before I do that, I'm going to make a new variable over here. This variable in a new action. Let's make it SF or for loop. Counts will just be 1, and actions, they'll just be 1 that does a set state, a set variable. Let's just call it loop var, and the value we can make just 1, 2, 3. So let's just paste this again because I've now changed it obviously. So just again, we have our outside scope, which is S. We have a inner scope for this for loop. Let's just change that color, let's make it yellow. Inner scope for this for loop. It's not yellow. There we go. Inner scope over there, which is SF, and we have the inner scope over here, which is SM. So we can go inspect the variables now in reactive tools. To do that, I open my dev tools using F12. I go to components and I scroll right to the top and just look a little bit down. You should see this one here called script runner. I'll zoom this a bit to make it more readable. So we have this component called script runner. Not this one over there, not wrapper or wrapper inner, this one, script runner with key script runner. Inside state, you'll see variables, and here you'll see all the different variable scopes or script scopes and their corresponding variables. So we have S, and for S we have background color, we have extra widgets and triggered from, which you can ignore for now. Background color is the one obviously we set there at the top while the scope was S. That's why the variable name gets prefixed by S. So it's S background color. We also have SF loop var. That's the for loop that we made with loop var being defined inside it. And we also have SM with record and row num. So record and row num are, as previously discussed in the generating components or arrays lesson, these are two variables that are set automatically when you have a map array action type. Similarly, when you have a for loop action type, we see our row number variable. This triggered from is setting the scope of S. Triggered from is the ID of the component that caused this script to run. Now, because the script doesn't have triggers, it means it's an on-mount script, and that means that triggered from is this component's ID. This is very useful when you want to when you have a script that can fire for various reasons. For example, when one of 4 different components mounts. So we might have 4 on mounts with various sources. That'll then tell you which component actually changed. So you can access that in your script for set state reasons or whatever it may be. So when you look at these variables over here, and let's call it the buckets that they are placed in, this also tells you how you can access it from other nested levels, and also tells you which variables you have access to in your current scope. So when we're inside our for loop, we only have access to things that are SF. So if I wanted to log a variable dot background color, which we do set here at the top, logging this will not give me the desired result. It'll tell me undefined. And that's because when I am trying to log this, when this accessor resolves, I'm currently in the scope of SF. I'm not in the scope of S, which is where this background color variable resides. We do have a way around that, and that is to tell Opus through the accessor that the variable we want to access is in a different scope. We do that by typing scopedVariable, then the scope we want to access, and then the variable name. So instead of just variable.background color, which then accesses the variable in the current scope, we can tell it we want to access a scoped variable in a different scope, which is S and its background color. Running this now, we'll see the log does show you the correct value. We can also mix and match these, which is when things get really complicated. So to illustrate that, let's set another variable. Well, let's use loopvar. Let's change this value to maybe let's do, how can we do this? Let's just make this color with capital like this. And inside our map array, I'm going to want to access this value of black. We're going to do it through a really convoluted way, just to illustrate this point. So I want to change my, let's do the, I guess we can do the background color over here. So let's just remove this. So we don't need this anymore. We're still setting this background color variable to black in the scope of S. And I want to change the background color over here. And I want to access this one. But how we're going to do it is through saying variable dot background, and then we're going to access another variable. So we have this one closing. This obviously has to become background color, but we're going to access this variable to inject the value of color over here. So this is going to be variable dot loopvar. And now, of course, this one, variable dot background, does not reside in the SM scope. It resides in the S scope. So we have to do scopedVariable dot S dot background, and this one is also a scoped variable dot S F dot loopvar. So this one will resolve first. This will resolve to color, and then this will become background color, and then we'll do scopedVariable dot S dot background color. So we see this didn't apply, and to debug this, what we can do is just go and log this for a start somewhere. We can also just inspect this as a good first step. So let's inspect this container over there. This is the one that should have received the background color. So inspect this. We'll see the background color is just the whole thing that hasn't been resolved. So normally when you see this, it means Opus didn't know it needs to resolve this. And in this case, it's because this accessor is nested inside an object, this object over there. So we need to tell Opus that it has to replace this, and it has to replace it during this scope, sm.scopedVariable, and there, sm.scopedVariable. And then we can see it working properly. This is about as complex as it will get until we start doing evals in our accessors. And we've got obviously multiple things happening here. The two concepts you need to understand is, firstly, when does Opus replace the accessor? That's these nested levels we spoke about. So in this case, obviously there's no nesting, so it replaces all of these when this action runs. all of those when this action runs, but not in this, not nested there. If it's nested there, you have to tell it when to replace it. But even though we're telling it now, it should replace it when we're in this scope. So SM being the scope when we're doing this map to. Even though we're telling it replace it now, we are also accessing a variable from a different scope when we are replacing it.